Hey, good morning, boys and girls. It is week 6, Friday, May 1st, 2020. And yeah, Mother's Day is right around the corner, May 11th. Your assignment? Quadrilateral task cards. Okay, and before we start on those, we need to review. It's Friday, so I know you can do this. Now, what kind of stuff do you need to know in order to be successful on these task cards? Well, you need to be familiar with that quadrilateral hierarchy. You're going to say, well, where did you get all that stuff from? Well, if you're not familiar with those things, you can go back and look at week 6 on Tuesday. Down here, there was a quadrilateral instructional video that gave you some background information and showed you pictures and how they are related, which is going to be very important in what you need to know. So let's review that. You can create this thing called a hierarchy for quadrilaterals by looking at their properties, their attributes. And recall what those properties are. They have 4 sides, all quadrilaterals do. They have 4 angles. Some of them have 2 pairs of parallel sides, like all of these examples right here. Some of them have right angles. Their angles intersect at 90 degrees, or that's called perpendicular lines. And they have congruent sides. Some of them have all 4 sides congruent, like the square and the rhombus, indicated by those symbols. And some of them have opposite sides that are congruent or the same size as each other, like in the rectangle. Then we have some of the quadrilaterals that don't have those same properties. For example, the trapezoids don't have 2 sets of parallel sides. They have exactly 1 set of parallel sides. The shape called the kite, it may not have any parallel sides, but it does have sides that are equal to each other, 2 sets of sides that are equal in length, but instead of being opposite each other, they are adjacent, they're next to each other. All that information can be summarized in one of these quadrilateral hierarchies. It starts out with the quadrilaterals at the top. Any 4-sided figure is a quadrilateral. If it has 2 sets of parallel sides, and that a little thing there looks like LL is the symbol for parallel, as you learned in an earlier activity this week, but 2 sets of parallel sides is a parallelogram. So everything down below this particular category is also a parallelogram. Now they're a little more special because if it's a rectangle, it has the 2 sets of parallel sides like the parallelogram, except it has 4 right angles. It has those intersecting lines at 90 degrees, perpendicular sides, and its opposite sides are equal in length. So a rectangle is technically a parallelogram, but it's a parallelogram that has to have those 90-degree angles. Okay, a parallelogram is not a rectangle, but the rectangle can be a parallelogram, and that can be confusing. All right, on this side, we have a category of the rhombus. Now, it too is a type of parallelogram because it has 2 sets of parallel sides. But in addition to that, its sides are equal in length. And then down here with the square, the rectangle is connected to the square and the rhombus is connected to the square. It is like a rhombus because it has equal length sides. It is like the rectangle because it has those 90-degree angles. So the square has the properties of all of these other shapes above it. So a square can be a rhombus. A square is a rhombus, actually. It is. A square is a rectangle and a square is a parallelogram. All right, over on this side, the trapezoid has its own separate little category because it has exactly one set of parallel sides, and the kite has its own category because it has those two sets of adjacent congruent sides. And so again, you can use this to kind of go backwards to see which categories fit into other categories based on the attributes. And one little last thing, just to let me know you watched this informational video today, I want you to tell me whose room Gabite was in today. Yeah, that's my Pokemon Go buddy. I just evolved him. All right, let's look at our lesson. And this is in Google Slides today. The first 5 are pretty easy. You're going to look at the shape. You're going to look at these symbols that you learned from an earlier activity. None of these have equal length sides, but this shape can be classified as 3 different things, and you're going to drag and drop these in the places of 1, 2, and 3. I've noticed when you click on these that you want to make sure you see that little cross thing, the crosshairs, before you try to start moving it, or you're going to have a challenge in dragging and dropping, but it'll work. By the way, that is not a rectangle. All right, so the first 5 slides, like I said, you're going to find those very easy. When you get to task 6, you have a hierarchy here in which you need to put 2 other of those quadrilaterals. Okay, the true and false, I think, is the most challenging one of all, because you're reading these 6 statements down here and you're deciding which is true and which is not true. A statement like a square is always a rhombus where all the angles are right angles. That is true. So I want to put this in the T-chart underneath true. But then I have a similar statement. A rhombus is always a square where all the sides are congruent. Well, this is not true. A rhombus is not always a square. A square is a rhombus, but the rhombus is not a square. So I would want to come down here, make sure I get my little crosshairs there, or my plus sign, and drag it over here to false. And you're going to do that with the other 4. Okay, this is an activity where you're going to drag and drop each of these 10 statements into one of these columns. These statements are either going to be always true, sometimes they're true, or they are never true. For example, a trapezoid is a square. That is never true. A square is a rhombus. That is always true. All right, and so these are you have to think carefully about each of these in order to complete it. This, you are going to look at each of the headings in the circles, and you are going to drag and drop the letters into the ones that they fit in. And it says they can be used more than once, or you can just type it in there. All right, so you can drag the letter in. Actually, you can't. You're going to have to type it in there. All right, so on to the next one. And this is the last one, task card 10. And you're going to answer these questions. And when you're going to reflect on the previous slide and answer these questions. Which category had the most letters that filled in, and why do you think? You're just going to click and type in the text. All right, so you're going to look back at here, and I can see the majority of these are 4-sided figures, so they're going to go in here. So I know that's going to be the largest category. So when I answer this question here, click on it to get my text box. I'm going to highlight this to get rid of these words. And then I'm going to say, because more of these shapes all right, so this is what you're going to do on that. I hope you enjoyed this activity and learn a lot. Bye-bye.